This video is brought to you by Wix. Street art has captured the world's attention in recent years, developing its very own graffiti industrial complex. Skater kid Shepard Fairey parlayed his 80s sticker street art into a guerrilla marketing company. He's now worth millions. 90s graffiti artist Retina turned his scribbles into a cool multi-million dollars worth of fine art. But the Coca-Cola of this market undoubtedly is Banksy, the anonymous dude with that voice.
There's probably a model in there somewhere.
The guy built a fake depressing Disney World, made a debatably fake amusing documentary, and shred his painting right after it sold for massive amounts of money. He also bought a painting at a thrift shop for $50, painted Hitler into it, and sold it for charity for hundreds of thousands of dollars. People tend to think that Banksy is either some asshole worthy only of parody.
That's what I told Lady Gaga. No, you text me. She texted me.
Or that he's an artistic genius. The real question is, what is Banksy trying to do with his art, and is his work achieving its intended goal? We're gonna find out in this Wisecrack edition on Banksy, Deep or Dumb. But before we get to it,
a message from me, Mark, aka Garrick's Wormuloid, about this video's sponsor, Wix. As an actor in LA, it can be very hard to set yourself apart, which is why I decided to use Wix to make a professional website that I can shamelessly send out to Hollywood producers. As you can see here, I went on there and I just told them that I'd never created a website before, and it walked me through the process step by step. Within minutes, I was uploading all my photos, all my videos, and some Earthling cinema highlights. It was super easy. So if you want to step up your professional game, head to wix.com/wisecrack or click the link in the video description. Garrick's out.
Arguably the world's most famous street artist, Banksy is a professional prankster best known for making satirical graffiti that frequently depicts children, rats, and repurposed iconography. Typically, the images will be accompanied by a slogan, and the various facets will combine to form some sort of anti-war, anti-capitalist, or anti-establishment message. Of course, Banksy isn't your typical street artist. Even by art world standards, he's made a lot of money. His estimated worth is over $20 million. What's more, his art is no longer typical street art. It's frequently safeguarded with plexiglass or removed from buildings entirely to be protected for posterity. Cool, but is it deep or dumb? Argument 1. Yes, Banksy is V-Smart, the latest iteration of a long line of smart art people doing smart art things. Because art is often appraised and understood by its relation to other art, we need to look back to Dadaism. Dadaism was a form of art that began in World War I as a means of rejecting capitalism and ridiculing the absurdity of modern life. It manifested as a form of protest art, and one of its central practitioners was Marcel Duchamp, who famously coined the term anti-art to describe work that challenged our preconceived definitions of what art should be, like when he submitted a urinal on a pedestal titled Fountain for an exhibition in New York. For this, he used the term ready-made to mean an already produced or found object that is repurposed as art. He chose mass-produced commercial objects, typically ones that served a utilitarian purpose, like, say, a urinal. As he said,
"You have to approach the object as if you had no aesthetic emotion. The choice of ready-mades is always based on visual indifference."
Duchamp was hoping that by exhibiting something that was explicitly not art, literally anti-art, he could ironically call into question where our concept of art starts and ends, while also arguing that anything, even a urinal, could be art. Of his ready-mades, he also said, "I don't attach any value, I mean commercial value or even artistic value to it." So additionally, by displaying art that is for practical purposes worthless, he's perhaps questioning why we even value art in the first place. Cool. For Duchamp, the creative act of art was not the sole endeavor of the artist, but a sort of collaboration with the spectator, who contributes to the creative act by deciphering and interpreting it. With Duchamp, the reaction of his audience was an essential part of the artwork itself. While Duchamp never admitted exactly what he hoped people's reactions would be to his pedestaled piss pot, he does seem to have expressed regret at how people actually reacted. Later in life, he bemoaned that you can make people swallow anything. That's what happened with Fountain. Duchamp seems to be saying that in attempting to challenge the entire concept of art, he ended up merely expanding the range of what kinds of images and objects people would choose to commodify and revere. Basically, Duchamp wanted to make you scrunch up your nose and picture your art covered in piss as a productive means of challenging conventional notions of what art should or shouldn't be. But instead of being grossed out, people were like, "Sweet, can I buy this used urinal for $20 million, please?" Which brings us to Banksy, who, like Duchamp, critiques the pretentiousness of the art world. Banksy argues that art is not like other culture because its success is not made by its audience. The public fill concert halls and cinemas every day. We read novels by the millions and buy records by the billions. We the people affect the making and quality of most of our culture, but not our art. Like Duchamp, Banksy wants to degrade the perceived snobbishness of the art world by A, using the everyday streets as his canvas, and B, using familiar, simple images that are universally accessible, regardless of whether you just wrote your dissertation on early Russian modernism. Furthermore, Banksy's work is all about criticizing capitalism and consumerism. Ironically, the popularity of his work triggers rabid consumerism, being physically removed from buildings to be sold in auctions on the art market, or protected from the elements with plexiglass. Arguably, Banksy's most Dada moment came this past October when his painting Girl with Balloon self-destructed immediately after being sold for just over £1 million. Banksy was following a specific tradition of autodestructive art invented by artist Gustav Metzger in the early 1960s. Metzger famously used acid to paint a white nylon sheet, in the process destroying it. Autodestructive art emphasized the audience's participation in the work, with artists typically destroying their work in a public space. The destruction and bearing witness to that destruction was all part of the work. But he was also referencing the tradition of Dadaism, as that ironically degrades or destroys the bubble of the art world. In that way, Banksy's latest work definitely qualifies by emphasizing the material fragility and ease with which art can be transformed into a pile of strips. Even if you're not a Banksy enthusiast, you can probably admit that it was pretty punk rock. More on Balloon Girl later. But don't worry, Banksy skeptics, there's plenty here for you. Argument 2. Banksy is irrelevant. His audience's opinion is all that matters. According to the theory of structuralism articulated by scholar Roland Barthes in his earlier years, there is no foundation of meaning in an artist's intention. Rather, meaning is grounded in whatever culture and systems exist at any given time. For example, the first caveman art critic who looked at this ox was probably like, Daniel's really pushing his work to the next level. Whereas we're like, oh, cute finger painting. Barthes, as he wrote in his essay Death of the Author, sees meaning as being anchored in the culture surrounding art, and it's our job as cultural detectives to figure out what the F this means. Structuralism makes sense when it comes to an artist like Banksy, who purposely remains anonymous and gives evasive answers about his intentions. By not declaring exactly what any one piece of art means, Banksy is protecting our ability to decide for ourselves, thus giving the audience all the interpretive space in the world to theorize and argue over answers we'll never have, such as whether or not his documentary Exit Through the Gift Shop is fake. For an example of work that relies almost entirely on societal context to be understood, look at Banksy's Kissing Coppers. In the image, two male police officers passionately kiss. This work was widely viewed as a repudiation of homophobia, a middle finger to the ugly tradition of the law telling people who and how they should love. However, compare Kissing Coppers to now routine images of President Trump and Vladimir Putin engaged in various forms of romantic intimacy. These images are clearly disparaging, suggesting that Trump's perceived subordination to Putin is embarrassing or shameful through the metaphor of gay intimacy. In other words, if Banksy's anonymity is meant smartly to give more power to the spectator and their interpretation, is that completely ruined if half of the people read your work in the opposite way you intended? In the case of Kissing Coppers, did he set out to mock homophobia? Or was he merely trying to humiliate cops by suggesting that these stereotypical manly men harbor gay fantasies? Does this ambiguity subvert Banksy's ability to accomplish anything? Or does it unapologetically function as a mirror to its viewer, who are free to interpret it as either pro-gay rights or simply homophobic? Does his anonymity hinder his ability to communicate his message? Argument 3. There was never any chance for Banksy to be deep because postmodernism. For an even less flattering angle on Banksy, let's look to Thomas Mann's postmodernist theories, which hold that there's basically no way for a successful artist to critique the art market through art. Why? Well, because the second they start making art that is recognized by the commercial market, they have thus entered said market. So are all successful artists sellouts? Would a Banksy writhing around broke in obscurity tagging the streets of London be more effective than Rolling in Dough Banksy? Well, it's possible. That said, only Rolling in Dough Banksy could pull off a project like Dismaland, a temporary art project and anti-amusement park that featured works from 58 other artists. It sold out almost instantly, with 6 million people trying to buy tickets and crashing the site. People waited for hours to gain entry. It's been criticized as something highbrow middle-class millennials participated in to feel better about themselves. Arguably, in setting out to critique the self-indulgent branded fun of amusement parks, Banksy simply replicated that experience with a snarky facade. If he set out to create an anti-amusement park, he may have simply just made a hipster Disney World. Also, the project was criticized as not really having anything to say besides capitalism bad. Let's briefly jump back to Girl with a Balloon. Here, Banksy pulled off a pretty cool stunt that gave the middle finger to all the art snobs bidding on his work. However, after the piece was shredded, it only increased its value. As Leon Benramon, the director of modern and contemporary art at Heritage Auctions, explains, it was meant to be a criticism of the art market, and I think it's going to double the value of the work. This is the ultimate example of the damned if he does, damned if he doesn't conundrum of being Banksy, or any other artist for that matter. You'd almost have to feel bad for the guy if he wasn't a millionaire. One last point on this. So Banksy's anti-capitalist work has been incorporated into the very capitalist system he dislikes. Now people pay top dollar for his work,
selling for $860,000,
and retweet his art on the ad-soaked feeds of Instagram. But what if this is just proof of Banksy's success? Here we are at Dismaland, or Banksy's Bethlehem Hotel, or gathering around a random gas station, or a hoity-toity art auction to consume his work. What if us voraciously partaking in this system, the very thing he's making fun of, means that the joke, quite simply, is on us? On to argument 4. Banksy is deep because he's a culture jammer in the grand tradition of situationism. The Situationist International was an organization of social revolutionaries made up of avant-garde artists, intellectuals, and political theorists who ran around Europe pulling artsy lulls from 1957 until 1972. One of the group's favorite tactics was the situationist prank, a subversive political prank, hoax, or stunt. For instance, when some situationists dressed up like monks and gave a sermon on Easter Sunday at Notre Dame announcing, "Verily I say unto you, God is dead." They used a technique called détournement, French for rerouting or hijacking, which essentially means changing something so that it means something entirely different than its original intention, particularly in regards to capitalist messaging. Like, if I write, "Capitalism does not suck" on my store window, and you crossed out the not. Now that would be a very dumb example of détournement and nobody would be impressed. Or, say, painting blood on the Nike logo because, sweatshops. Culture jamming, taking its influence from the situationist, tries to disrupt our environments, which are so deeply saturated by corporate and consumer imagery.
The average North American consumes 5 times more than a Mexican, 10 times more than a Chinese person, and 30 times more than a person from India.
They do so by using mainstream language and rhetoric subversively to critique the culture and force us to reconsider it. We definitely see Banksy interrogate these questions in works like Slave Labor, which depicts a young boy making Union Jack bunting ahead of the Diamond Jubilee in 2013. A pretty straightforward critique of sweatshop labor, the image was painted on the exterior of a Poundland discount store in London. However, it was removed, framed, and sold in an auction for over £700,000. Ironically, what started as a provocative stunt ended up being co-opted by the very market forces Banksy was critiquing in the first place. Successful détournement? Maybe not. Compare his efforts to those of the Yes Men, led by culture jamming duo Jacques Servan and Igor Vamos, operating under the mission of using humor and trickery to highlight the corporate takeover of society.
I think Barry, as well as all the other protesters, are simply, in a word, focused too much on reality and on facts and figures.
The Yes Men made a name for themselves creating spoof websites and posing as corporate spokesmen. In one example, they impersonated World Trade Organization spokesmen and pitched the idea of using first world waste to provide third world food.
The number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5 would no longer refer to combinations of food, but rather just the number of times the product had been recycled.
This functioned as effective culture jamming because, for one, the performance couldn't be directly commodified, though it would be memorialized in a Yes Men documentary film. And it directly confronts the powerful, fully employing corporate lexicon in service of constructing colorful, elaborate lies that reveal stunning truths about the full extent of corporate greed, while indicting the cold, calculated, fundamentally dishonest nature of business speak. Instead, we might put Banksy alongside the likes of fellow graffiti artist Shepard Fairey, whose Obey stickers might have once invoked this anti-consumerist message in the film They Live, but now adorns a $44 doormat. Or Supreme, who took the anarchist's beloved brick, an object perfect for sending through a bank window, and stamped their logo on it for a limited edition collector's item. You can now buy one on eBay for over $1,000. Radical. So at the end of the day, what should you think of Banksy? Well, whatever the hell you want, obviously. You can find his art valid and meaningful, but is it productive? Not really. Will it incite a revolution to overthrow capitalism? Definitely unlikely. Is its massive popularity and high value in the art market necessarily at odds with its success as anti-establishment intervention? Almost certainly. So what do you think? Is Banksy deep, dumb, or somewhere in between? And is art really better when nobody knows about it? Let us know in the comments, and if you want to build your own website with Wix, click the link in the description. And as always, peace.